My husband handed me the divorce papers with a casual smile. "It's all filled out," he said. "If there's anything you don't like, feel free to change it." That grin on his face made it clear he thought he was in the right. I never imagined, back when we met and started our office romance, that the man I married, Tatum, would one day make me feel like slapping that smug smile off his face. I'm Sally, a working wife, married for 3 years. We don't have kids yet. Our marriage isn't awful, but it's certainly not great. Lately, Tatum has been lazy and refuses to pitch in around the house. I don't expect him to do everything, but sharing the chores is reasonable. He, however, insists housework is women's work, probably because he lived with his parents for so long, but mostly because of the influence of his family, especially his mother. When you marry someone, their mother-in-law can have a big impact on your life. It's like a gamble, and for me, it feels like I keep drawing the short straw. "Sally, can't you cook a decent meal?" Another missed opportunity. My meeting ran late, so I got home late. When I do manage to leave on time, I cook properly, I asked. "What do you mean?" She said. "A woman's first priority should be the home, not work. It's common sense to have dinner ready when your husband gets home." I wish that so-called common sense had stayed in the past. Every day after work, my mother-in-law is somehow always there. Tatum gave her a spare key without asking me, so now she shows up uninvited every day. She's there before I get home, and I'm too afraid to ask how early she starts settling in. When I do finally arrive, she's already pointing out every little flaw in the house, offering criticism and sarcastic comments. Honestly, if Tatum keeps eating like this, it's going to ruin his health. She comments every time I cook. Sigh. My poor son, stuck with such a disappointing wife. I can't stand how she brushes off everything I say, as if she isn't even listening, and calling him my poor boy just feels strange. It would be bearable if it happened occasionally, but her constant presence is wearing me down. And Tatum? He laughs it off and never says a word. If she's going to come over every day, the least she could do is help out. But no, she criticizes everything without ever lifting a finger. Sometimes she even helps herself to my dinner. One night, after working hard to cook, I walked into the kitchen to find her helping herself to my takeaway. "Well, I'll just take this," she said, "and I'll grab the strawberries from the fridge too." "By now," I protested. "Wait, you can't just take our dinner." But Tatum said nothing. I gave him an angry look, but he just smiled foolishly. "Why aren't you saying anything?" I demanded. "It's no big deal, just a little bit." "It's not just a little bit," I snapped. "You took everything." "Then hurry up and cook something," he replied, plopping down on the sofa without a care in the world. I was livid. I couldn't understand why he wasn't standing up for me. I had been dealing with his mother's constant intrusion for far too long, and now I was expected to make dinner after she had taken everything? As I stood there, fuming, Tatum just sat there, indifferent. Then one day, my mother-in-law didn't show up. My husband wasn't home either. For the first time, the house was quiet, and yet, I felt uneasy. The reason became clear when I opened the fridge. My steak, the one I'd bought for a special occasion, was gone. I knew immediately where it had gone. I grabbed my bike and raced to my in-laws' house. It was only a 7-minute ride, but I was breathless by the time I arrived. I pushed open their front door, unannounced, knowing my mother-in-law often did the same at our house. Inside, I found the remains of my steak on the table, half-eaten, with only the empty packaging left. "Why did you eat it?" I demanded, looking at my in-laws in disbelief. "That was for me and Tatum. You didn't ask." My mother-in-law just smiled at me, unfazed. "Oh, it was delicious. Thank you." "It's not about whether it was delicious," I snapped, furious. "That steak was for us, and you ate it without asking." Well, Tatum had some too, she said dismissively, but I didn't get any, so it's fair. How is that fair? I demanded, feeling betrayed. You didn't even ask. Tatum, as usual, just grinned sheepishly. It's okay, we can just buy more. Don't worry about it. That's not the point, I said, growing more frustrated by the second. You never stand up for me. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I turned to my father-in-law for support, but to my surprise, he simply watched quietly, not offering any help. I couldn't believe it. I had hoped for something, anything, to change, but it felt like everything I did was falling on deaf ears. I thought I had bought it, but I was mistaken, I muttered, unsure of where things had gone wrong. Sally, next time get a bigger piece of meat so we can all enjoy it properly, my mother-in-law said casually. That's not the issue at all. Do they have no sense of apology? Their selfishness drained me so much that I couldn't even find the energy to respond. I'm leaving, I declared. Don't you dare come barging in here again. My mother-in-law's voice echoed as I turned to leave. My husband stayed behind, mindlessly drinking beer. At that moment, I felt utterly indifferent. A few days later, I realized I needed to have a serious talk with my husband. The conversation took a surprising turn. While I was out working, I unexpectedly saw my husband. It wasn't unusual since he's in sales, but it was strange because he had told me he was on a business trip in another state. I was curious, so I watched as he walked arm in arm with a woman I didn't know. Judging by his grin, it was clear they shared more than a casual connection. I instinctively hid and listened as they approached, overhearing their conversation. Tatum, why are you looking at me like that? She asked. Because you're so cute, he replied, his voice dripping with affection. Their conversation continued. Do you really want to marry me? She asked. Yes, I want to marry you as soon as possible, he said eagerly. Then will you get a divorce? She pressed. Of course, I'll talk to her about it tonight, he promised. The decision was made. He was cheating. Surprisingly, I felt no shock, just a sense of clarity. I realized I had fallen completely out of love with him. There was no love left in my heart. I was done. The next steps were clear. I needed to find a moving company. After discovering the affair, I promptly moved out. 3 months later, I was moving again. The movers delivered my belongings, but I had to unpack them myself. The full-service option was too costly. As I opened the first box, the doorbell rang. I knew exactly who it was. My husband, along with his mistress, stood at the door. I unlocked it and let them in without a word. Hey, Sally, long time no see, my husband greeted, his tone too casual. Wow, this place is really nice, my father-in-law remarked, glancing around. Sally, what were you thinking running away and buying a condo without telling us? My mother-in-law exclaimed. I had finally fulfilled my dream of buying a new place. The apartment I shared with my husband had always been old and worn, and when I found a newly built condo that matched my vision, I didn't hesitate. So, when I informed my husband, he showed up uninvited, with my in-laws in tow, just as I had expected. They barged in without hesitation, but I quickly stepped in front of them to block their way. Stop right there. Only residents are allowed beyond this point, I said firmly. What's gotten into you? My husband asked, his expression one of disbelief. They're my parents. Sorry, Tatum, but your parents are strangers to me now, I replied calmly. My mother-in-law looked stunned. How could you say that? Isn't family more important than anything? Other things matter more than that, I answered, my voice steady. You're such a bad wife, my husband muttered. Tatum, You should leave her. Relax, Mom. But yeah, divorce might be an option. My husband added nonchalantly. I'll ask for the condo as part of it. It's kind of small though, isn't it? Ignoring their comments, I glared at them, but they kept talking, unaware of my growing frustration. Well, if we divorce, we can figure something out, right? My mother-in-law said, reaching for the door to the living room. I gently pushed her hand away. It didn't hurt, but she was shocked by my boldness. Sally, how could you push my hand away? She demanded. What's gotten into you? I'm just asking you to respect our privacy and not enter without permission. I said coolly. You're strangers to me now. My mother-in-law's face hardened. Fine, if that's how you feel, then we'll really become strangers. Tatum, divorce her immediately. My husband smirked oddly, as if his mother's outburst amused him, but before he could respond, I spoke up. Don't worry, there's no need for that, I assured them. My husband looked bewildered. What's going on? I don't understand. I'm already single, I stated plainly. What? How could you do that without telling me? My husband exclaimed. Did you really do that? My mother-in-law added, her voice rising. You can't just do whatever you want. That's right, my father-in-law chimed in. Filing for divorce without my consent is invalid. I'll take this to mediation. But I had already anticipated this. Oh, but Tatum was the one who prepared the divorce papers. I said calmly. What are you talking about? My husband asked, confused. Remember when we first got married? You said, if there's something you don't like, feel free to bring it up without hesitation. I reminded him. Oh, yeah, he trailed off, suddenly recalling the conversation. I never thought I'd actually need it, I admitted, but I'm glad I kept it. My husband's distress was evident. Why did you handle it yourself? Who does that? Well, it's not a bad thing, I said, but let's settle this thoroughly before we talk about the divorce. With that, I pulled out documents and photos from a large envelope by the door. What's this? My husband stammered as I laid the photos of him with his mistress on the table. Evidence of your affair, I said flatly. Wait, no, that's not. It started long before I left home, I interjected. I hired a detective after we separated. We've got proof. My lawyer stood by me as I confronted the mistress. Tatum told me he's divorcing you and marrying me, she said, her smile wide. I'm so happy he's finally leaving you. I was prepared for a confrontation, but surprisingly, she didn't put up much of a fight. Tatum will take care of my compensation and handle the paperwork. Just make sure it's done. Wait, I didn't agree to any of this, I said, confused. She smirked. He asked me to wait quietly until the divorce is finalized. That's why I kept avoiding you. I took a deep breath. Now that the truth's out, there's no more denying it. You're admitting you reached out to her first, and that speaks volumes. Wait, it's not what you think, my husband started. It doesn't matter, I interrupted. You have the right to contest the divorce papers, but it will happen eventually. I'm also seeking compensation and a fair division of assets. Caught completely off guard, my husband collapsed to the floor, his face pale. My ex-husband, now just a distant memory, was always useless as a husband. Given his lack of contribution to our marriage, I don't expect anything in terms of savings, compensation, or property division. But honestly, I'm not counting on any of that. My main goal is to divorce him and break away from him and his family. Nothing else matters. I have my own job, my own income, and I've saved enough even after buying the condo. I'm not worried about my future. As long as I stand up for myself, that's all I need. With these thoughts in mind, I looked down at my stunned ex-husband. But it was my mother-in-law who couldn't keep her mouth shut. "Sally, what are you talking about? Your son cheated, didn't he?" she said smugly. "Well, even if he did, it must have been your fault too, right? It's the wife's fault when she gets cheated on." I stared at her, feeling utterly drained. "If that's how you feel, then please leave." This is exactly what I expected. I didn't think we'd ever have a reasonable conversation. No matter what she said, she was just a stranger to me now, someone completely foreign to my life. I moved to usher her out, but she resisted fiercely. "Even if you're divorcing, you need to hand over this condo for the property division," she demanded. "Why should I?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "We didn't buy this with marital funds. I purchased this condo with money I had before we got married, so it's not marital property. It's mine." She looked taken aback. "Really?" "Yes, really," I replied. Both my parents passed away shortly after I started working, and I had planned to care for them. But facing your constant attacks and insults shattered that resolve. Tatum never contributed financially, and looking back, I wonder if he spent all his money on his affair. Regardless, I've been covering almost all of our living expenses, so there are no savings from our marriage. But compensation is a different matter. You'll make sure your son pays it promptly, even if it's in installments. I could see the disbelief on her face. "I can't believe this. Sally, can't you reconsider the divorce?" "I'll talk to my son about it." "Why should I? There's no benefit for me in that." I shook my head. "But here's a suggestion, let's have steak tonight. A nice, high-quality cut." "Do you have money for that?" She hesitated. "Well, do you have it? If you lend it to me, I'll go buy it." "No way," I replied. "There's no benefit for me in that either." With a deep sigh, I calmly told them, "Please leave." They all looked pale as they scrambled to leave, but I felt a sense of relief. The door closed behind them, and I finally felt a weight lift off my shoulders. A few days later, my ex-husband finally accepted the divorce without resistance. He even mentioned a lump sum compensation payment, likely realizing the seriousness of the situation. His mistress, however, was furious when she found out he wouldn't be paying her share of the compensation. I had always covered our living expenses, but my ex's salary was low, even lower than mine. He couldn't afford to pay anyone, let alone his mistress. However, she signed the documents, and now I would ensure I got the compensation I was owed. I was relieved when I didn't have to worry about my ex showing up at the condo. It seems his mistress aged rapidly and lost energy from the shock. Meanwhile, my ex came back home, crying because he couldn't afford rent and was struggling on a pension. With him and his unreliable family out of my life, I've started fresh. I'm enjoying the peace of living alone, no one making snide remarks, no one eating my groceries without permission. I'm finally free, and it feels amazing. Maybe next time, I'll treat myself to some local specialties. "Freedom," I whispered to myself. "It feels so good." I smiled and grabbed another beer.